In this chapter, we will be exploring importing USD assets. But before we do that, I want to give you a quick overview of the template we're going to build. Now from the top here, you're going to see basic project settings. Like I'm using backdrops as a quick way of adding notes for myself, just like you would use sticky notes or something in Nuke. And this is just a reminder at the top to set up some graph state variables. The next section is the importing of assets. Standards, we would have standardized settings for the department as a starting point. And so you could set this up in your pipeline as live groups or something that's version controlled or managed. And so you would bring that in as a live group potentially, and that would maybe give you a starting point for render settings. Now, once we get past that, I've got two parallel streams here. And what I'm doing here is I'm using a standard Katana workflow moving down here. But on the left side, I want to also show some of the newer USD tools and the equivalent functionality. So first we would be scene prepping, doing things like moving things around, building collections, pruning, maybe some object settings, setting up crypto assets, etc. After that, we'll talk about cameras. And then we're also creating local cameras. So we'll talk about this again. Say you wanted a perspective view for test rendering, that kind of thing. After that, we'll discuss material overrides. So local materials, network materials, bringing those in, merging them, assigning them to different objects. And then also editing existing network materials that are coming in from the USD assets. Once we get past that, we'll talk about sequence lighting. So Gaffer 3 over here, or USD lights over here. Once we've got standardized sequence lighting, we're going to move out into individual shot lighting. Whether it's individual lights per shot, whether we're modifying lights that come from the standard sequence lighting or adding additional lights. I'll go over this Arnold DOF settings. This is a custom node that I created. Once we've done all that kind of work, anything that is shot specific would be done in here. And then after that, we're going to bring it back through a variable switch and then out to some standard render settings. This would be modifying any standards that you brought in previously or just setting it how you like. And once we've done that, we're going to split out into separate render passes, which I'll go over later. Really quick, I want to mention, I'm sure you've noticed, all these backdrops, I've actually numbered these backdrops. And the reason is, if you hit the J key, you can see here that any of the backdrops will show up in this list. And so by numbering them, I can actually control the order that these show up in, because normally it's just alphabetical. So by numbering them, I can actually have this top to bottom correspond to the top to bottom of the entire node graph. And another thing that I want to mention real quick for an interface, if you hit spacebar, of course, you're going to go back to your standard. This is just a standard layout. When you maximize something, of course, now you only have one panel. But if you wanted to keep just the parameters panel on the right side, for instance, you could actually go up here to right click on the tab. And you want to move this to a right dock. And that's going to drop it over here. You can see it's no longer a tab. It's actually stuck on the right side. Those tabs have moved over here. And so now if you hit spacebar, you're going to have your node graph over here, and you're going to have your parameters over here. So now let's talk about importing assets. Before we do that, I want to give you a quick tour of what the USD assets look like on disk. And you can see here in our project, we've got our assets folder. So if we go into this folder, you'll see we've got 3 subfolders. And if you actually open in this Katana subfolder, you'll see SE10 Katana file. Let's actually go ahead and open that up because I want to show you real quick. So if I open that, let's go up to assets. Oh yeah, by the way, if you ever want to pin anything here, I'm sure you know this, but so you go into a folder, you can always hit plus, and now you've got it bookmarked on the left side. So let's go into this Katana subfolder and open that file that they've provided. The reason why I want to open this up real quick is just to show you what was provided with the asset and also talk about how things have changed in the latest versions of Katana. From a high level, this looks somewhat similar to what I'm setting up in my template. There's quite a few differences though. But what I'd like to point out first is this sequence in node. So if you look at this, this is a legacy node from earlier versions of Katana. This is how we used to bring in USD assets. This is called a USD in node. Now, the way this works is you would simply point to your USD data, and once you brought that in, it's going to dump everything directly into Katana's scene graph. You'll notice in the new Scene Explorer window up here, nothing is showing up under USD. That's because everything goes straight into the scene graph. So now if we go back over to my working template over here, we can talk about the new method of bringing in USD data. So if we look at one of these nodes, these are a number of different nodes, one for each shot that I'm using. And these are USD sublayer add nodes. The interface is very simple. You're just going to simply browse to your USD data. And I'm going to show you what I'm doing here. If you look at the path, here was our high level asset directory. If we go into this directory, you'll see textures. That's where all the texture maps live. But if we go into the show subdirectory, you're going to see 3 folders in here. Live groups, we'll talk about later. There is a groom in there, I've noticed. I think those are curves that you can use. Sequences and USD. So if we go into the USD folder, you'll see there's characters, there's environments, and there's props. Now, this is the data specifically for the character, environment, and prop assets. And we don't actually want to open this up because what we're going to do is open a different USD file that is pointing to these different assets and assembling them together. So that lives under the sequences folder. So I just went back up a level, go into sequences. Here are the 2 different sequences they've provided. I'm just working with sequence 10. So we're going to go into the USD folder here. And now you'll see that there's camera, character, prop, and shot. And the folder that we want is shot. So go into shot and you're going to see 5 different USD files, one for each of the shots that we're going to be working on. And so you would just select one of these files and hit accept. And so what I've done here is I've got 5 different USD files that I've imported and simply just renamed each one of them. And then we'll talk about this variable switch. So this is a variable switch that depends on some graph state variables that we've created. So if we go back up to the top here, you'll see I've left a note, create graph state variables. So first of all, let's undock our parameters again. So you can minimize that and then drag the tab back over to here. So if you go to this project settings tab, under variables, I've created 3 graph state variables, one for the sequence, one for the project, and one for the shot. Now the project is just simply the location of the parent project directory. And we're going to use that later when we go to render out footage. And if you want to create a new graph state variable, of course, you would just go over to here and add a variable. First of all, you would rename it. So you would click on here, rename my awesome variable. And then you would just say foo bar, now you've got 2 different values that you can use potentially. And for now, I'm going to just go ahead and delete that because we don't need it. So you can see here under shot, I've actually created the 5 different shot numbers that we're going to use. There's only one sequence. If you had more than one sequence, of course, you could put it here. But this shot variable we're going to use for our variable switch. So to create a variable switch, first of all, it's very easy. Hit tab, look for a variable switch. And then when you have a variable switch, you need to add patterns to it, right? So you need to go over to this wrench, new port with pattern. And so what I did, I just did this 5 times. Your variable name, you would just say shot. And then for each of the patterns, you'd just list your shot number. So S1010, etc. So that's all that is. You can see that there are 5 ports that it created, one for each of these patterns. And that's what I've plugged into each one of these. Okay, so we'll look at the one that I already created. And so I've filled this out, and Katana is very smart to, depending on whatever you've set your variable up here to, it's going to read the correct one. Now there's another way that you can do this. Instead of using separate USD sublayer add nodes for each different shot, you can actually create an expression and do it all in one. So that's what I've done here. And this is something that I saw in one of the other tutorials that are available on the Foundry Learn website. If you right click here, you're going to see that constant is the standard value mode. So if you have constant, you can just choose a shot. But if you right click and choose expression, then you get this twirl down here where you can put in an expression. You just have to note, if you just paste it in your path, you would have to make sure you put an apostrophe at the beginning and the end. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that once I get to this part of the file name, I'm actually ending the string, and then I'm going to add with a little plus sign, and then I'm going to get the variable from the shot. So that's the shot variable, and then I'm going to add the expression at the end, and you can see this is how it evaluates. And of course, if you go up here and change your shot, you'll see that that text string updates as you do it. Right? So that's how you can see that it's working. You would just hook that up instead. If you value efficiency, which you definitely should, this might be the best way to go. But the reason that I prefer to do it this way is simply from the concept of reading the node graph as a sort of like a map. So I'd like to be able to look at a node graph, and this is the same for Nuke as well. I like to see the node graph as like a visual representation of what's happening. And so I can very easily see here with this method that, I'm importing 5 separate shots, and that's all being brought in through a variable switch. So it's totally your preference. Both of these ways are completely valid. And so after I've brought in my assets here, I also have a groom, and this originally came from a live group that I was provided. I've converted it into just a standard group node. If you have a live group, I think you can just right click and one of these things will be convert to a group node. And conversely, if you have a group node, you can convert it to a live group. Let's dive in. So anytime you have a group node, you can just hit Control Enter to go inside. Once you're inside a group node, of course, you can see up here, this is the level of the node graph that you're in. And you can always go back up by hitting this Home button. So going into this node, you'll see I just have 2 variable switches. These are the same variable switches that we're using for our USD assets. And in each case, I'm just bringing in some XGen files. So there are 2 characters, and there are separate XGen files for each one of these shots. And that's what I'm piping in here. So then they provided network materials for the hair. You can see there's hair for both characters. That just gets merged together and then assigned. So pretty straightforward. If we go back out here, again, I'm just merging the USD assets with the Groom assets. So if I view this, you're going to see all the USD assets are up here. The Groom assets are coming in down here. So the materials and the geometry of the hair. Now, eventually, we'll get to that in a little bit, but eventually we're going to convert those USD assets into Katana assets. And we'll cover that in another chapter. And once I do that, then all of this stuff is going to go down here.